Okay, everyone, here is your final review about characterization. Good morning, readers. This is going to be a little review about characterization to get you ready for a quiz you're going to be taking tomorrow. I haven't seen you for a few weeks, so I want to make sure that you guys remember some elements we talked about when it comes to characterization. And first of all, if you remember, we talked about creating characters, kind of like telling what the human beings are like in the story, and that's the whole point of writing a story is you want to get connected to those characters. Okay, so that's why we're going to review the important things we talked about and get you ready for your quiz. Now, if you remember, the first thing that we introduced is that there are two ways an author shares information about the characters. The two opposite ways are direct and indirect. If you remember, direct characterization, this guy right here, direct characterization, that is where the writer actually tells us directly what characters are like or what their personality traits are. Remember, it's like go directly home. It's direct and to the point. The author tells you flat out some information about that character. There's no guessing involved. Indirect characterization, on the other hand, is completely different. That's where the writer shows us the personality of the characters through the characters' actions, words, appearance, private thoughts, and what other characters say about the characters. In other words, we get a chance to decide what characters are like, and we have to use that skill of inferring in order to do it. So if you remember, there are 5 ways we talked about that authors build a character, okay? They do it by building up or by showing us what the characters actually say themselves, their speech, this one here. Also, how they look, their appearance. They give us clues in the text that help us kind of get a good idea of what that character is all about. Private thoughts, a lot of times what goes on in the characters' minds, we're able to see that, and that gives us a lot of insight about who they are as characters. The way that others react to them is another useful tool that authors utilize to help us understand a character. And of course, their actions, what the characters do themselves, tells a lot about their personality. If you remember, I gave you some practice ideas. We talked about John and how he cared for others, and we read this paragraph and we discussed how this was direct characterization because we are flat out being told that John cares for people. He bought groceries, so there's no guessing. He is obviously a caring person. The author tells us that flat out right here. John cared a lot for the well-being of others. This information just gives us examples of that. But the direct characterization is John cared a lot about others. Here's another example of direct. Linda was a strong woman who lived her entire life on her own terms. We had talked about how she didn't apologize and she didn't compromise and she stuck to her guns. There's no guessing. The author flat out says she's a strong woman and who does these things. There's no inferring. There's no reason that we have to try to guess anything. It pretty much tells us flat out that that's what Linda's all about. Okay? And then there's another example. Now here's an example of indirect. It says Jim was very unlike any other businessman. He made sure that all of his clients got what they paid for. Now, this is an example of indirect because it does tell us Jim is unlike any other businessman, but it really doesn't tell us what he's like. We have to infer, basically looking at the fact that he makes sure his clients get what they paid for, we can infer that he's responsible, that he's conscientious, that he's, caring about the needs of his clients. We have to infer that, though. It doesn't tell us that. That's why this one would be an example of indirect. And the last thing I want to leave you with is here's a good way to remember. We talked about the hand a little bit, one on each finger, the different ways that we get to know a character. The thumb over here is the one that I call what others say because that's something that doesn't directly involve the characters. Just like you have a hand, you have the 4 fingers, and you've got the thumb here. The thumb is kind of what other people say. So remember that that's the odd one that the character himself isn't involved in, but it's how other people view the character. But then you have the other 4 fingers that go together because they directly involve the character. You have the thoughts and feelings of the character, the actions of the character, what the character does, what they say, what does a character or characters, what do they say, and their appearance, how do they look. So there you have it, you guys. That's pretty much the 5, a good way to think of it. Use the hand. The thumb is what others say, but the other 4 fingers are what the character themselves, either what they look like, their actions, what they're thinking, or what they say in their dialogue. Good luck on your quiz. Have a great day.